Mjolnir, unregistered trademark /MYOL-n, is a fictional weapon that appears in publications from Marvel Comics. It is the favored weapon of the superhero Thor. The weapon, which first appears in Journey into Mystery No. 83, published in August 1962, was created by writer Stan Lee and designed by artists Jack Kirby and Joe Sinnott. Mjolnir is typically depicted as a large, square-headed grey lump hammer. It has a short, round handle wrapped in brown leather, culminating in a looped lanyard. The object is based on ʻmjʒln, the weapon of the mythical Norse god. The hammer's name translates as the Crusher, or the Grinder. Publication history: Mjolnir debuted in Journey into Mystery No. 83, and was immediately established as the main weapon of the thunder god Thor. The weapon's origin is revealed in Thor Annual No. 11, although another version is presented in Thor Volume 2, No. 80. Other significant moments in Marvel continuity include the altering of Mjolnir's enchantments in Thor No. 282 and Thor No. 340. The temporary possession of Mjolnir by a member of the Enchanters 3 in Thor Volume 3, No. 14 15. And when the hammer has been damaged, occurring in Journey into Mystery No. 119. Avengers No. 215. Thor No. 388. Thor Volume 2, No. 11. Thor Volume 2, No. 80 and Thor Volume 3, No. 600. Background: in Marvel continuity, Mjolnir is forged by dwarven blacksmiths, and is composed of the fictional Asgardian metal Ura. The side of the hammer carries the inscription, "Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor." The hammer is created when Thor's adopted brother Loki cuts off the hair of the goddess Sif as part of a cruel jest, and, when threatened with violence by Thor, promises to fetch replacement hair from the dwarf smiths. Loki commissions the hair from the sons of Ivaldi, and the obliging dwarves also make a magic ship and spear as gifts for the gods. Loki is convinced that no one can match their workmanship, and challenges a dwarf named Eitri to make finer treasures. Eitri creates a golden ring and golden ball spear with magical properties, and finally begins work on a hammer. Loki panics at the sight of the treasures, and, afraid he will lose the wager, transforms himself into a mayfly and stings Eitri's assistant on the brow as he is working the bellows for the forge. The assistant stops for a moment to wipe away the blood, and the bellows fall flat. As a result, the hammer's handle is shorter in length than Eitri had originally intended, meaning that the hammer could only be wielded one-handed. Despite the error, the Norse gods consider Eitri to have forged the greater treasures, and in retaliation Loki loses the bet and the sons of Ivaldi sew Loki's lips shut. The ruler of the Norse gods, Odin, uses the hammer called Mjolnir by Eitri and eventually passes it to his son Thor, who must first prove he is worthy to wield the weapon. Another version of the hammer's origin is presented in the second volume of the title Thor, stating that Odin orders the dwarven blacksmiths Eitri, Brock and Buri to forge Mjolnir using the core of a star and an enchanted forge. The forging of the hammer is apparently so intense it destroys the star and nearly the earth itself. Mjolnir itself has several enchantments. No living being may lift the hammer unless they are worthy. It returns to the exact spot from which it is thrown and returns to Thor when summoned. It may summon the elements of storm by stamping its handle twice on the ground. Manipulate the weather on an almost global scale. Open interdimensional portals, allowing its wielder to travel to other dimensions. And transform Thor into the guise of a mortal, the physician Donald Blake, by stamping the hammer's head on the ground once. When Thor transforms into Blake, his hammer takes the appearance of a wooden walking stick. When disguised, the hammer's enchantment limiting those who may lift it are not in effect. The hammer itself has also shown to be unaffected by external enchantments. A previous provision of this enchantment required that the hammer could not be gone from Thor's grasp, or out of physical contact with Thor for more than 60 seconds full without his spontaneous reversion to his mortal self. Fortunately, Mjolnir is small enough for the god to tuck it into his belt for times when he prefers to have both his hands free. In some stories this limitation did not apply in Asgard, although this stipulation was removed in a storyline in which this enchantment is transferred to Stormbreaker, the hammer of Beta Ray Bill. After this, the Donald Blake persona disappeared for a time, and Thor assumed a civilian identity simply by changing into modern clothing, carrying Mjolnir concealed within a duffel bag. Thor eventually adopts the mortal persona of Jake Olsen as penance for accidentally causing the original Olsen's death during a fight, and simply pounds a fist to effect a change. During this time, Mjolnir would disappear when Thor became Olsen, and reappear in Thor's fist when returning to his true form. Mjolnir was originally capable of creating chronal displacement and therefore allowing time travel, although this enchantment was removed by the entity Immortus with the Thunder God's consent to help the planet Phantus, which was trapped in limbo. However, Thor is still able to manipulate time with Mjolnir. When Ragnarok took place, Mjolnir was separated from Thor and fell through the dimensions, creating a tear in hell that allowed Doctor Doom to escape. Although Doom and the FF attempt to claim the hammer, none of them are able to lift it, resulting in Donald Blake Euro, who had been returned to life when the spell negating his existence wore off with Asgard's destruction, Euro claiming it himself. With Blake and Thor once again coexisting, the hammer resumes its original disguise of a walking stick. The hammer is later damaged in a fight with Bon, Thor's grandfather. Doctor Strange is able to repair the hammer using the Odin force possessed by Thor, but warns Thor that, should the hammer be damaged in such a manner again, the new link between them could result in Thor being killed himself. The hammer was also sliced in two by the Destroyer. In Thor number 118 he had to go to the forges in Pittsburgh to mend it. Thor has several times used the mallet to pin down opponents, since they cannot lift the mallet. After Thor's death in the fight against the Serpent, Loki is able to take Blake's walking stick Euro, the only remaining trace of Thor after he was replaced by Tannerusa Euro, and turn it back into Mjolnir in front of the Silver Surfer, the Surfer's energy and Loki's belief in his brother, allowing the hammer to return to Thor and restore his memory in time to face the God Devourer that was about to consume his soul in the afterlife. During the original Sin storyline, as Thor and the Avengers investigate Chu's murder, Nick Fury whispers an unrevealed secret to Thor that causes him to lose the ability to pick up Mjolnir. The nature of Mjolnir's enchantment also changes so that even Odin cannot lift it. The hammer is subsequently picked up by an unknown female who inherits the power of Thor, as the inscription changes to "if she be worthy." Other wielders, individuals in the primary continuity: Beta Ray Bill, Captain America, Storm, Eric Masterson, Odin, Bon, Buri, an unidentified female, sentient constructs in the primary continuity, Zedira Ko, the Tomorrow Man's mining robot, Airwalker, Awesome Android. The hammer has been lifted by Earth itself when animated by magical means. Characters from outside the primary continuity: Conan the Barbarian, Dargo Ktor, Loki, Magni, Rogue, Miguel O'Hara, Sarah Rogers, Wadden, Alex Power, Jane Foster, Superman, Wonder Woman, Black Widow. Several imitations of Mjolnir have also existed. These include Stormbreaker and the Mace Thunderstrike, created for Beta Ray Bill and Eric Masterson respectively. Loki has been responsible for the creation of several imitations. A version of Mjolnir, called Stormcaster, is presented to the mutant X-Men member Storm in an attempt to control her, which she later destroyed using Mjolnir. Despite Thor, another version is given to the mercenary Deadpool. Loki also allows Surtur to use the forged Mjolnir was created from to craft copies during Ragnarok. Hydra created evil versions of Iron Man, Captain America, Hawkeye and Thor. The Thor imitator had a technological imitation of Mjolnir. Tony Stark and Reed Richards also create a technological imitation Mjolnir for use by Ragnarok, the clone of Thor, during the Civil War storyline. A tiny version was created from a sliver of Mjolnir for the use of Thrug, leader of the Pet Avengers. Powers and abilities: Mjolnir can be used both offensively and defensively. Described as impacting with sufficient force to destroy mountains, with primarily adamantium and vibranium proving too impervious. Other offensive capabilities include creating vortices and force fields, emitting mystical blasts of energy, controlling electromagnetism, molecular manipulation, and generating the geoblast, anti-force, the thermoblast which can even challenge such beings as Ego the living planet, and God-blast. The hammer can travel through planets to return to Thor. It can even create antimatter particles, and whirling it round can create wind powerful enough to lift the Taj Mahal. There are also other several rarely used abilities. Mjolnir can track a person and mystical items. Absorb energy, such as draining the Asgardian powers of the wrecking crew into the wrecker. Or detect illusions, as Thor once commanded the hammer to strike the demonic Mephisto, who was hiding amongst false images of himself. As a former religious relic, Mjolnir is lethal to the undead, causing creatures such as vampires to burst into flame and crumble to dust. Mjolnir also can project images, as Thor shows a glimpse of Asgard to fellow Avenger Iron Man. It is near indestructible, surviving bullets, antimatter, and the melter's melting beam. The hammer has two properties relating to movement. When it is deliberately thrown by Thor, it will return to his hand despite any intervening obstacles or distance, even traveling through planets to return to Thor. When it is dropped or set aside, it takes a fixed position, from which it cannot be moved except by a worthy individual. The hammer has also drained energy from the radioactive supervillain called the Presence, who is forced to surrender before being killed. Mjolnir was able to absorb, contain, and direct the energy of a null bomb, which was powerful enough to destroy an entire galaxy. Mjolnir also causes a side effect when used against the hero Union Jack, when Thor erroneously attacks the hero with a blast of lightning and then cancels the offensive. Union Jack is accidentally endowed with the ability to generate electricity. The hammer has been used to both power an Atlantean warship and temporarily drain the force field of the villain Juggernaut. If someone swears on the hammer, their spirit can be summoned up after death. As well as absorbing radiation, the hammer can repel it back. But Mjolnir is also not indestructible, having been damaged several times. A force beam from the Asgardian destroyer slices it in two. The Molecule Man dispels the atomic bonds between the hammer's molecules, vaporizing Mjolnir. The hammer shatters after channeling an unmeasurable amount of energy at the celestial Exeter. Dark god Pericus slices Mjolnir in half with a magical scythe. And the hammer is shattered when it collides with the Ura weapons of Loki's storm giant followers, resulting in an atomic-scale explosion. Other versions, during the Celestial Saga storyline, an earlier version of Mjolnir is revealed to exist and was apparently thrown to Midgard by Thor's sons, Modi and Magni, landing in the Rhine River where it transformed into the magical Rhinold. A version of Mjolnir in the What If? Series was wielded by Rogue after she accidentally absorbed Thor's powers, the remnants of Thor in her psyche helping her assume his role. In a future visited by the Hulk where Earth had been decimated by nuclear wars, Thor's hammer was one of the many mementos of the Age of Heroes kept by the now elderly Rick Jones. The Maestro the Hulk's twisted future self attempted to use the hammer against the Hulk during their second confrontation in Rick's Museum of Hero Memorabilia, but failed to lift it even with Thor's death as he was naturally unworthy to do so. A later storyline set before the Hulk's fight with the Maestro featured the elder Rick working with his younger self to defeat Thanatos, another alternate Rick, by using his own ability to summon and lift the hammer, explaining that he had been judged worthy to use it for things that young Rick had yet to do and Thanatos would never achieve. In a similar but alternate dystopian future, Mjolnir also rests in a superhero artifact vault overseen by Rick Jones. Mjolnir can be seen as one of the many treasures in the one-shot The Last Heist that takes place in the Telos universe. In the Ultimate Marvel imprint titled The Ultimates and its sequel The Ultimates 2, the Ultimate version of Thor wields a Mjolnir styled after a classical war hammer. It is not magical in origin, but rather an advanced technological marvel designed by the European Union's Super Soldier program to mimic Thor's powers. At the end of the Ultimates 2, Thor proves his divinity and reclaims his Asgardian powers to defeat Loki. In the Ultimates 3, Who Killed the Scarlet Witch, Thor wields a hammer more closely resembling the mainstream Marvel Universe Mjolnir. In one scene where he is entering a secured building, the computer controlling access identifies first Thor, then Mjolnir. This leads another character to question why the computer identified Mjolnir as a separate, sentient organism, but Thor does not give an explanation for this. He later displays a wall of weapons, including both hammers, which he states were gifts from his father forged by Ulrich the Troll. However, in the prequel miniseries Ultimate Comics, Thor, it is revealed that the original hammer is not the real Mjolnir, but instead Dr. Braddock gives Thor tech armor, and Thor suggests to turn the power supply into a hammer. It is believed that both versions of the hammer is not restricted by the worthiness test. In Ultimate Comics, the Ultimate's Thor puts his hammer inside the room with no doors with his son Modi, so that he may escape the destruction and genocide of the Asgardians. With Thor being the last Asgardian alive and his hammer is gone, he loses his divine powers and becomes mortal. Tony Stark kept Thor's tech armor and hammer since Thor no longer felt he had use for it, and gives it to Thor to restore his powers because he feels the world needs a god of thunder. In other media, Mjolnir debuts in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in a post-credits scene in Iron Man 2 by itself at the bottom of a giant crater in New Mexico with SHIELD. Agent Phil Coulson informing Nick Fury that "we've found it." References. External links: Mjolnir at the Marvel Universe Wiki.